When hearts collide in Manhattan, the autumn evening painted Manhattan in shades of gold and amber as Victoria Chen stepped through the glass doors of the Whitmore Gallery. At 22, she possessed an ethereal beauty that seemed to glow from within. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing delicate features that spoke of her mixed Chinese and Mexican heritage. Tonight, she wore a simple navy dress that complemented her graceful figure. Purchased with money saved from her part-time job at the campus bookstore, Victoria was here on scholarship, both literally and figuratively. Columbia University had awarded her a full ride for her exceptional artistic talent. And tonight, she was representing the student body at this exclusive charity auction supporting arts education. Her portfolio of paintings inspired by the immigrant experience in America had caught the attention of several prominent collectors. The encounter that changed everything as Victoria admired a striking abstract piece. She felt someone's presence. Beside her, she turned to find herself looking into the most intense gray eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair styled perfectly and wearing a tailored black suit that probably cost more than her entire semester's expenses. "Beautiful work," he said, his voice smooth and confident. The way the artist captures light breaking through darkness feels almost spiritual. Victoria smiled, surprised by his genuine appreciation. "I was thinking the same thing. Most people at these events seem more interested in the price tags than the actual art." He laughed, a rich sound that made her heart skip. "You're not wrong. I'm Jonathan Pierce." Extended his hand, and when she took it, she felt a jolt of electricity. "Victoria Chen," she replied, trying to ignore the way his touch affected her. "The Victoria Chen? I've heard about your scholarship work. Your paintings about identity and belonging are remarkable." She blushed, pleased that someone of his obvious sophistication knew her work. "You're too kind, Mr. Pierce." "Just Jonathan. Please. And I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. Would you like to get some air? The gallery can be suffocating." A romance born under city stars, they found themselves on the gallery's rooftop terrace, Manhattan skyline twinkling around them like earthbound stars. Jonathan had shed his formal demeanor, becoming more relaxed and genuine with each passing minute. "Tell me about your art," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. Victoria's passion ignited as she spoke about her work. Her dreams of using art to bridge cultural divides and tell stories of those often overlooked. Jonathan listened with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "My parents immigrated here with nothing but hope," she shared. "My father worked 3 jobs so I could focus on school. Every brushstroke I make carries their sacrifices." Jonathan's expression grew thoughtful. "I built my company from a dorm room idea, but I had advantages you didn't. Your journey is far more impressive than mine." As CEO of Pierce Technologies, Jonathan had revolutionized sustainable energy storage, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Yet talking with Victoria, he seemed less like a corporate titan, and more like a man searching for something real in a world of artificial connections. 3 months of magic there. Relationship bloomed with surprising intensity. Jonathan would send Victoria flowers with handwritten notes referencing conversations they'd had. He remembered details that previous boyfriends had forgotten within hours. When she mentioned loving a particular poet, he surprised her with a first edition of their collected works. He took her to places she'd only dreamed of seeing. Private museum tours after hours, helicopter rides over the city at sunset, quiet, dinners at restaurants where the chef knew them by name. But what touched Victoria most were the simple moments when Jonathan chose her company over business obligations. Turning off his phone to focus entirely on their conversations. "I've never felt this way before," Jonathan confessed one evening as they walked through Central Park. Fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. "You make me want to be better than I am." Victoria's heart soared. Despite their different backgrounds, they'd found something precious together. Her friends at Columbia were initially skeptical, but even Emma Martinez, her most protective friend, admitted that Jonathan seemed genuinely devoted. "He looks at you like you hung the moon," Emma observed after meeting him at a casual dinner. "Just be careful, Victoria. Men with that much power and money live in a different world." But Victoria felt secure in Jonathan's love. He had introduced her to his inner circle, brought her to company events, and spoke openly about their future together. When he mentioned wanting her to meet his parents at the upcoming Pierce Foundation gala, she thought it meant their relationship was becoming serious. The night everything shattered, the Pierce Foundation's annual gala was Manhattan's social event of the season. Held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it drew celebrities, politicians, and business leaders from around the world. Victoria had carefully chosen her dress, an elegant emerald green gown that Jonathan had complimented when she'd shown him a photo. She arrived feeling confident and excited, ready to be introduced to Jonathan's family and closest associates. But from the moment she walked in, something felt different. Jonathan seemed tense, distracted, barely making eye contact when he greeted her. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly as they stood in the reception area. "Fine," he replied curtly, scanning the crowd. "Just business matters." Throughout the cocktail hour, Victoria noticed subtle changes in Jonathan's behavior. He introduced her to people with less enthusiasm than usual, sometimes seeming almost embarrassed by her presence. When his father, Robert Pierce, approached with a group of board members, Jonathan's entire demeanor shifted. "Father," Jonathan said formally, "I'd like you to meet Victoria Chen." Robert Pierce was an imposing man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. He looked Victoria up and down with barely concealed disapproval. "Ah, yes, the art student," he said dismissively. "How charming." The condescension in his voice made Victoria's cheeks burn, but she maintained her composure. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Pierce. Jonathan speaks of you often." "Ouch. I'm sure he does," Robert replied before turning back to his son. "We need to discuss the Singapore acquisition, privately." As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself increasingly isolated. Jonathan seemed to be avoiding her, engaging in intense conversations with business associates while she stood awkwardly on the sidelines. When she tried to join his discussions, she was met with polite but clear dismissal. The public humiliation, the devastating moment, came during the dinner program. As Victoria sat at their assigned table, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Jonathan was speaking with a group of his peers at the adjacent table, his voice carrying just enough for her to hear. "Come on, Pierce," one of them was saying. "You can't be serious about the girl. She's cute enough, but hardly appropriate for someone in your position." Victoria held her breath, waiting for Jonathan to defend her as he always had before. Instead, his laugh was cold and unfamiliar. "Please," Jonathan said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you think I'd actually consider anything serious with someone like that?" "She's been amusing. I'll give you that. But let's be realistic about what this is." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white with the effort of maintaining composure. "The poor girl probably thinks this is going somewhere," another voice chimed in with cruel amusement. "That's the entertaining part," Jonathan replied, his tone growing more callous. "She's so naive, so eager to believe in fairy tales. It's almost endearing how she thinks someone from her background could actually fit into our world." Victoria felt the room spinning around her. This couldn't be the same man who had held her tenderly just days before, who had whispered promises about their future. But his next words confirmed her worst fears. "I mean, look at her," Jonathan continued, apparently enjoying his audience's rapt attention. "Pretty enough to be seen with, exotic in an interesting way, but completely out of her depth. The cultural gap alone is insurmountable. Can you imagine bringing someone like that home to mother?" The cruel laughter that followed his words broke something fundamental inside Victoria. She stood slowly, her legs trembling, and walked toward their table. The conversation stopped abruptly as she approached, Jonathan's face paling as he realized she had heard everything. "Victoria," he started, but she held up her hand. "No need to explain," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I understand perfectly now." She removed the delicate bracelet he had given her for their 2-month anniversary and placed it gently on the table. In front of him, "Thank you for showing me who you really are before I made an even bigger fool of myself." The dignity in her voice made Jonathan flinch. Around them, the dinner conversation had quieted as people sensed the drama unfolding. "Victoria, wait," Jonathan said, standing and reaching for her arm. "You don't understand. You were just being honest for the first time in 3 months." She interrupted, stepping away from his touch. "I hope you and your friends enjoyed the entertainment." With that, she turned and walked away, her head held high despite her shattered heart. Behind her, she heard the uncomfortable murmur of voices as the other guests processed what they had witnessed. The immediate aftermath, Victoria made it to the museum steps before the tears began to fall. The autumn night air was sharp against her skin as she struggled to process what had just happened. 3 months of tenderness, of shared dreams, and whispered promises been revealed as an elaborate lie. Her phone buzzed with texts from Jonathan, but she couldn't bear to read them. Instead, she called Emma, who arrived within 20 minutes to drive her home. "What happened?" Emma demanded as Victoria collapsed into the passenger seat, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. "We're right," Victoria whispered. "We live in different worlds, and I was stupid to think love could bridge that gap." Back at the gala, Jonathan stood frozen on the museum steps, watching Victoria's taxi disappear into the Manhattan night. The cruel satisfaction he had felt while performing for his peers had evaporated the moment he saw the pain in her eyes. "Well, handled," his father said, appearing beside him. The girl was becoming a distraction you couldn't afford. But as Jonathan looked at his father's approving face, he felt sick. What had he done? In his desperate attempt to prove himself to his father and business associates, he had destroyed the most genuine relationship of his life. The bracelet was still in his pocket, warm from Victoria's skin when she had removed it. As he held it, Jonathan realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But by then, the damage was done, and Victoria Chen was gone. The night that was supposed to solidify his position in society had instead revealed the emptiness at the center of his privileged existence. As rain began to fall on the city, Jonathan stood alone on the museum steps, finally understanding what he had lost and wondering if he would ever get the chance to make it right. 3 days had passed since the gala, and Victoria had barely left her small apartment in Washington Heights. Emma had been bringing her food and checking on her regularly, but Victoria remained devastated by Jonathan's betrayal. The man she thought she knew, the one who had made her believe in love beyond social boundaries, had never existed at all. Phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and texts from Jonathan, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. What more could he possibly say? He had made his feelings crystal clear in front of his elite friends, reducing their entire relationship to a cruel entertainment. On this particular Thursday evening, Victoria finally decided she needed to get out. Her art supplies were running low, and she had a project due next week. She needed to try to reclaim some normalcy. Even if her heart felt permanently broken, the rain had been falling steadily all day, turning the city streets slick and dangerous. Victoria pulled on her coat and grabbed her keys, determined to make the trip to the art supply store before it closed. She needed the familiar comfort of her paints and brushes, the only things that had never let her down. The moment that changed, everything Victoria never saw the taxi running the red light. One moment she was carefully crossing Amsterdam Avenue, lost in thoughts about her upcoming gallery submission, and the next she was lying on the wet asphalt, her body broken and still. Impact had thrown her nearly 15 feet. Her head had struck the pavement with a sickening crack that witnesses would remember for months afterward. Blood pooled beneath her dark hair, mixing with the rain that continued to fall steadily on the accident scene. "Call 911. Someone screamed. As people rushed to help, "Don't move her." Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the air. The paramedics worked with urgent efficiency, stabilizing Victoria's neck and checking her vital signs. Their faces were grim as they loaded her onto the stretcher. Severe head trauma, one of them radioed to the hospital. Female, multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding. At Ada 4 minutes. The call that shattered Jonathan's world. Jonathan was in his office when Emma Martinez called. He had been staring at his phone for hours, debating whether to try calling. Victoria again. The past 3 days had been tortured, replaying his cruel words over and over in his mind. Is this Jonathan Pierce? Emma's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Yes, he said immediately, recognizing her from their dinner weeks earlier. Emma, is Victoria okay? I've been trying to reach her. She's in the hospital, Emma interrupted, her voice breaking. Mount Sinai. There was an accident. They don't know if she's going to make it. The phone slipped from Jonathan's hand, clattering onto his mahogany desk. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the impossible words he had just heard. Victoria, his Victoria, might be dying. He was in his car within minutes, abandoning a board meeting that would determine a $100 million acquisition. None of that mattered now. Nothing mattered except getting to her. The hospital vigil begins. Helen Rodriguez found Jonathan pacing the intensive care unit waiting room like a caged animal. She had been treating trauma patients for 15 years, but the anguish on this man's face was particularly striking. Are you family? She asked gently. Jonathan started, then stopped. What was he? The man who had publicly humiliated the woman he loved. I'm Jonathan Pierce, Victoria Chin's boyfriend. The lie came easily, because it felt more true than any other description. Dr. Rodriguez studied his face carefully. Mr. Pierce, I need to be honest with you. Victoria has suffered severe head trauma. We've induced a coma to reduce brain swelling, but the next 72 hours are critical. She also has 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and internal bleeding that we've managed to control. Jonathan felt his knees give way. He sank into a plastic chair, his head in his hands. Can I see her? Family only, I'm afraid. Please, Jonathan said, looking up at the doctor with desperate eyes. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I love her. I need to see her. Something in his raw honesty made Dr. Rodriguez nod. 5 minutes. She can't have visitors yet, but you can see her through the window. The view that broke him, Victoria looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by the machine's keeping her alive. Her beautiful face was swollen and bruised, her head wrapped in white bandages. Tubes and wires connected her to monitors that beeped steadily, the only sound proving she was still fighting. Jonathan pressed his palm against the glass window, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. This was his fault. If he hadn't destroyed her heart, if he hadn't driven her away, she would never have been on that street corner. She would be safe, probably in her studio apartment, painting and dreaming about her future. I'm so sorry, he whispered against the glass. Victoria, I'm so sorry. He made a silent promise in that moment, one that would define the rest of his life. He would not leave this hospital until she opened her eyes. He would be here when she woke up, even if she never wanted to see him again. The family arrives, Michael. Chen arrived from Boston the next morning, having driven through the night when Emma called with the devastating news. Victoria's older brother was a software engineer, practical and protective, and he took one look at Jonathan with immediate suspicion. You're him, Michael said, without preamble, his voice cold. The one who broke her heart. Jonathan nodded, unable to deny it. I'm the reason she was out that night. This is my fault. You're damn right it is, Michael snapped. But then he saw the genuine anguish in Jonathan's eyes. The way the normally immaculate businessman looked haggard and broken. What are you doing here? Waiting for her to wake up, Jonathan said simply. I'll wait as long as it takes. Michael wanted to throw him out, to ban him from the hospital entirely. Out. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Jonathan had been sleeping in that uncomfortable waiting room chair for 2 days straight, or the fact that he had apparently abandoned his billion-dollar company to maintain his vigil. The Pierce family intervention by the 3rd day, word of Victoria's accident. And Jonathan's vigil had reached the Pierce family. Robert Pierce arrived at the hospital with his wife Catherine, both clearly displeased by their son's behavior. Jonathan, this is enough, Robert said sternly. You have responsibilities. Singapore deal is falling apart without your attention. Jonathan looked up from the medical journal he had been reading, trying to understand Victoria's condition better. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from sleeping in chairs. Then let it fall apart, he said quietly. Catherine Pierce gasped. Jonathan, you can't be serious. You barely knew this girl. I knew her well enough to destroy her, Jonathan replied, his voice hollow. And now she might die thinking I never cared about her at all. You don't care about her, Robert insisted. This is guilt, nothing more. You said so yourself at the gala. For the first time in days, fire returned to Jonathan's eyes. He stood slowly, facing his father with new resolve. I lied, he said clearly. I lied to you, to your friends, and most unforgivably, to myself. I love Victoria Chen more than I've ever loved anything in my life, and I threw that away to impress people whose opinions mean nothing to me. Admission hung in the air between them. Catherine reached for her husband's arm, recognizing something final in their son's voice. If you continue this foolishness, Robert threatened, I'll have you removed from the board. You'll lose everything we've built. Jonathan smiled sadly. I already lost everything that mattered, Father. The rest is just money and power, and what good are those if you have no one to share them with? The transformation as the days turned into a week. Then, too, Jonathan underwent a complete transformation. The arrogant businessman who had mocked Victoria's feelings was replaced by a man consumed with purpose and regret. Like he learned the names of every nurse and doctor treating Victoria, brought coffee for the staff during their long shifts, called Victoria's parents in California daily with updates. Even though they had never met, Emma, initially hostile toward him, gradually began to soften as she witnessed his dedication. She found him one evening reading aloud from Victoria's favorite poetry collection, his voice barely audible through the glass window of her room. She can't hear you, Emma said gently. Maybe not, Jonathan replied without looking up. But I need to try. I need her to know that someone who loves her is here. Do you really love her? Emma asked. Or is this just guilt? Jonathan closed the book, his finger marking the page. I fell in love with her the moment she smiled at me in that gallery. Everything I said at the gala, that was fear talking. Fear that I wasn't good enough for someone so genuine, so pure. So I tried to destroy what we had before she could realize. She deserved better. Emma sat down beside him in the waiting room. She does deserve better. I know, Jonathan said simply. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the man she deserves. Whether she gives me another chance or not. Signs of hope on the 14th day. Dr. Rodriguez brought news that made Jonathan's heart leap with hope. Her brain swelling has decreased significantly, she reported. We're going to try reducing the medication keeping her in the coma. If her body responds well, she could wake up within the next day or two. Jonathan gripped the arms of his chair, overwhelmed with relief and terror. What would he say to her when she opened her eyes? How could he possibly explain or apologize? For what he had done? That night, he was allowed into her room for the first time. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand gently in his, careful of the 4 lines. Victoria, he whispered, I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know something. I love you. I loved you from the first moment we talked about art and dreams and everything that matters. What I said at that gala, that wasn't me. I was a coward who was afraid of how much you meant to him. He squeezed her hand gently. I know you probably never want to see me again when you wake up, and I'll understand. I needed you to know that every moment we shared was real for me. Every laugh, every conversation, every time I told you I loved you, that was the truest thing I've ever said. As if responding to his voice, Victoria's fingers twitched slightly in his hand.
Ow.
Jonathan's breath caught as her eyelids fluttered, and for just a moment he thought he saw a glimpse of the brown eyes he had fallen in love with. Victoria? He called softly, pressing the call button for the nurse. But her eyes closed again. She remained still. Dr. Rodriguez arrived quickly, checking her responses and monitoring the machines. This is very good, she said with the first smile Jonathan had seen from her. She's starting to respond to stimuli. I think she'll wake up soon. Jonathan nodded, hope and fear warring in his chest. Soon, he would know if the woman he loved could ever forgive him for the worst mistake of his life. As he settled back into his chair for another night of waiting, he prayed that love would prove stronger than the hurt he had caused. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, marking time until the moment that would determine both their futures. Victoria's consciousness returned slowly. like surfacing from deep water. The first thing she noticed was the sterile smell of disinfectant, followed by the steady beeping of machines. Her head felt heavy, wrapped in cotton and confusion. When she tried to open her eyes, the fluorescent lights sent sharp pain through her skull. "Victoria?" A familiar voice called her name, but it sounded wrong somehow, filled with desperate hope instead of the casual confidence she remembered. She managed to crack her eyes open, blinking against the harsh light. The face that came into focus made her heart clench with a mixture of love and betrayal so intense she gasped aloud. Jonathan was beside her bed, his usually perfect appearance disheveled and worn. His dark hair was unkempt, his expensive shirt wrinkled, and his eyes were redrimmed with exhaustion. But it was the expression on his face that shocked her the most. Gone was the cold arrogance she had seen at the gala. Instead, she saw raw vulnerability and something that looked like genuine anguish. "You're awake," he breathed, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank God, you're awake." Victoria tried to speak, but found her throat too dry. A nurse appeared immediately, having been alerted by the change in her vital signs. "Welcome back, sweetheart," the nurse said warmly, adjusting Victoria's bed and offering her small sips of water. "You've been sleeping for 2 weeks? How are you feeling?" Confused Victoria managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "What happened?" Dr. Rodriguez entered the room, her professional demeanor masking her relief at seeing her patient conscious. "You were in an accident, Victoria. A taxi ran a red light and hit you while you were crossing the street. You've been in a medically induced coma while your brain healed from the trauma." The memories came flooding back then. The gala, Jonathan's cruel words, her heartbreak, and finally stepping into the street through her tears. She remembered the rain, the squealing brakes, and then nothing. "I want him to leave," Victoria said quietly, not looking at Jonathan, but knowing he was there. "Please make him leave." The words hit Jonathan like physical blows, but he had expected them. "Victoria, please, just let me." "No." Her voice was stronger now, fueled by remembered pain. "You said everything you needed to say at the gala. I don't want to hear anything more." Dr. Rodriguez looked between them, sensing the complex emotions in the room. "Hey, Mr. Pierce, perhaps? It would be best if you gave Victoria some time to recover. She needs rest." Jonathan nodded reluctantly, but as he stood to leave, he couldn't stop himself from speaking. "I'm not giving up on us, Victoria. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm not walking away again." After he left, Victoria closed her eyes and let the tears fall. Even after everything, seeing him still affected her deeply. The love she had felt hadn't disappeared with his betrayal. It had just become tangled with hurt and confusion. The stubborn vigil, despite Victoria's clear wishes, Jonathan did not leave the hospital. He moved his vigil from her room to the waiting area outside the ICU, where he continued his relentless watch. The nurses had grown accustomed to his presence over the past 2 weeks, and some had even developed a grudging respect for his dedication. Emma arrived that afternoon, having rushed over as soon as she received the call that Victoria was awake. "How is she?" Emma asked, finding Jonathan in his usual spot. "Hurt," Jonathan replied simply. "She doesn't want to see me, which I understand. But Emma, I can't leave her. Not again." Emma studied his haggard appearance. 2 weeks of sleeping in waiting room chairs and surviving on hospital cafeteria food had transformed the polished billionaire into something more human. "You look terrible," she observed. "I feel terrible," Jonathan admitted. "Every moment she was unconscious, I was terrified I'd never get the chance to tell her the truth about how I feel." "And what is the truth?" Emma asked, though she thought she was beginning to understand. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. "The truth is that I'm a coward who destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him because I was afraid of what my father and his friends would think. The truth is that I love Victoria Chen more than my own life, and I spent 3 months lying to her about who I really was." "No," Emma said firmly. "You spent 3 months being who you really are, and then one night being who you thought you were supposed to be. There's a difference." Her words gave Jonathan a glimmer of hope, but it faded quickly. "It doesn't matter what I intended. What matters is that I hurt her when she needed me to protect her." The slow recovery over the following days, Victoria's physical condition improved steadily. The swelling in her brain continued to decrease. Her broken bones were healing, and she was able to stay awake for longer periods. But emotionally, she remained fragile and closed off. Michael had extended his stay in New York to help coordinate her care, and he found himself in the awkward position of being grateful to the man who had broken his sister's heart. He hasn't left the hospital, Michael told Victoria during one of his visits. The nurses say he's been here since the night of your accident. He's lost weight, he looks like hell, and apparently he's ignored about 50 emergency calls from his company. I don't care, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe you should, Michael suggested gently. The man I met doesn't seem like the same person you described from the gala. People make mistakes, Victoria. Sometimes they make terrible, stupid mistakes that they spend the rest of their lives regretting. Victoria turned away from her brother. You didn't hear what he said, Michael? How he laughed about me with his friends? How he called me entertaining and naive? No, I didn't hear that, Michael agreed. But I can see what's left of him now, and whatever else he may be. That man outside is genuinely broken over what happened to you. The letter on Victoria's 5th day of consciousness a nurse brought her an envelope with her name written in Jonathan's distinctive handwriting. He asked me to give this to you, the nurse explained. Said you didn't have to read it if you didn't want to, but he needed to write it. Victoria stared at the envelope for hours before finally opening it with trembling fingers. My dearest Victoria, it began. I know I have no right to ask for your attention, let alone your forgiveness. But I need you to understand what really happened that night at the gala. Not as an excuse for my inexcusable behavior, but as the truth you deserve to hear. For 3 months, you showed me what love really meant. Loved me not for my money or status, but for the person I was when I was with you. You made me want to be better, to be worthy of the faith you had in me. But that scared me more than anything I'd ever experienced. My father had been pressuring me about our relationship from the beginning. He made it clear that my position in the company, my standing in society, even my inheritance, could be jeopardized by what he called inappropriate associations. I told myself I didn't care, that love was more important than any of that. But that night, surrounded by his friends and business partners, I lost my courage. I became the man he wanted me to be instead of the man you would help me become. I said those horrible things because I was trying to convince myself that losing you would be easier than fighting for you. I was wrong about everything, Victoria. You didn't need to fit into my world. My world needed to change to deserve you. And now I've lost you, and I would give everything I own, everything I am. For just one chance to prove that the man who loved you was real, I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that every moment we shared meant everything to me. You weren't entertainment or a novelty. You were the best part of my life, and losing you is my greatest regret. I love you, Victoria. I will love you for the rest of my life, whether you can ever love me again or not. Forever yours, Jonathan. By the time Victoria finished reading, tears were streaming down her cheeks. The pain was still there, but so was something else. Recognition. This was the voice of the man she had fallen in love with, not the stranger who had humiliated her at the gala. The confrontation that evening, Victoria asked the nurse to tell Jonathan she would see him. He appeared in her doorway within minutes, looking both hopeful and terrified. Thank you for reading my letter, he said quietly, remaining by the door as if afraid to come closer. I needed to understand, Victoria replied, her voice stronger now. I needed to know if the man I loved ever really existed, or if I had just imagined him. Jonathan took a hesitant step into the room. He existed. He exists. Victoria, everything between us was real. The way I felt about you, the plans we made, the future I imagined with you. All of that was real. Then why? The question came out. As barely a whisper, why did you destroy it? Jonathan closed his eyes, the pain of his confession evident on his face. Because I was a coward. Because I let fear of my father's disapproval convince me that protecting my social standing was more important than protecting your heart. Guess I'm weak, and I hurt the strongest, most beautiful person I've ever known. Victoria studied his face searching for any sign of the cruel arrogance she had seen at the gala. All she found was genuine remorse and love so deep it took her breath away. "You called me naive," she said, testing him. "You were never naive," Jonathan said immediately. "You were trusting, which is completely different. You trusted me with your heart, and I shattered that trust because I was too much of a coward to fight for what we had. You said I didn't fit in your world." "My world doesn't deserve you," Jonathan replied without hesitation. "It's full of people who value appearances over authenticity, wealth over character. You're too good for that world, Victoria. You always were." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing his words and the sincerity behind them. Finally, she spoke. "I almost died, Jonathan." "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking, "and it would have been my fault. If you had died thinking I never loved you, I never would have forgiven myself. You would have spent the rest of your life knowing that your last words to me were lies." Jonathan nodded, unable to speak through his tears. Victoria reached for his hand, surprising them both. "Then it's a good thing I didn't die." The long road back, Victoria's decision to forgive Jonathan didn't mean their relationship could simply resume where it had left off. Too much had been broken for easy repair, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, as Victoria continued her recovery, Jonathan proved his commitment through actions rather than words. He had indeed abandoned his company R.